Hello and welcome to NEWS.am. This is Factor of Power. I am AKCAM, and today our guest is Dr. TANER, a prominent Turkish historian and well-known specialist in the Armenian Genocide studies. So, Dr. AKCAM, thank you very much for being here and welcome to Armenia.
Thank you very much and thank you for having me.
Dr. AKCAM, you are here in Yerevan to present your new book, The 100 Years of Apartheid, the history of the Turkish Republic, which has been translated into Armenian. Could you tell us what is the key message of the book and what conclusions you have come while examining the foundations upon which the Turkish Republic was established?
2023 is the 100th anniversary of Turkish Republic. And since I know myself, we have been debating and discussing in Turkey why we couldn't really finally establish a democratic Turkey, why there is not a country that respects human rights. And then I thought, in order to understand, we should look the foundation of this state. And this is how my project started. My central argument with this book is that the way that we talk about Turkey is a misperception. Usually, not only for Turkey, of course, for a lot of nation states, the founding period of that state is always considered as a period of war of independence or the territorial integrity to establish sovereign rights on certain territory for that ethnic or national group. And this is how we looked our history also. The leftist, right-wings, conservatives, progressives, or ethnic groups, they all consider the period 1918-1923 as a period of war of independence against the foreign occupation. The British, France, and they occupied Anatolia, and the Turks, along with Kurds, fought an independence war, and so on and so forth. My argument is this story actually was the secret of everything, because by repeating this story, we are covering up something else. And this is the foundation of an apartheid regime. My argument is in the book, with the beginning of 1918, Turkish elite in Ankara, which were the continuation of Union and Progress Party, followed a very clear-cut program. And according to this program, Jews, Christians, and in a developing way, Kurds were not considered citizens of Turkey. They were considered second class of citizen, and they established Turkish Republic based on these legal norms. So what I'm arguing in the book is not something that there are minorities in Turkey and they are suppressed, or there are minority problems, discrimination, and so on that you experience in every nation state.
So it was done by the model of millet system in the period of Ottoman Empire.
This is what millet system was. It is worse than millet system. Millet system accepted the transfer. If you a member of a Christian millet nation, then you had the opportunity to get converted to become the member of the dominant nation, Islam. In today's republic, you cannot change your status. My argument is very simple. Turkey, like a pyramid. On top of it, there is only one group. This is the Sunni Turkish majority. They are the real citizens of Turkey. And this is not what I'm saying. This is in the laws and regulations also. And in the middle, there are Kurds and Alevites. And the top of the strata is the Christians and the Jews. And let's assume you are an Armenian and you converted into Islam and you take a Turkish name. And you would think that you will belong the top of the group, Turkish Sunni group. No, you can't, because already in your birth registration, it is there is a notification that your grandparents, your parents, and you are Armenians, regardless of your changing your religion and name. And the Armenian, the code that they used is 2. The code that they used for Greek is number 1. And the code that they used for Jews is number 3. And this coding system, this is like the Nazi Germany, that they had a special coding system for Jews. They developed from the founding period. The way that the Lausanne Agreement was signed, they developed this coding system. So if you have belong to one of these coding group, then you don't have any chance to go upper level in the society. This is laws, these are regulations. And my argument is nobody looked in these laws and regulations in Turkey. And if Turkey wants to be a democratic country, we should go through all these laws and regulations and change these. This is the argument.
We commemorate the 110th anniversary of the Armenian Genocide. What do you think? Is Turkey still feeling any dangers from this issue, or has this page been already turned for Turkey?
I think from the perception, Turkish government or Turkish state is not much interested on that topic so much. I don't think that they take the genocide issue as important as they took before 2015. Before 100 years anniversary of 100 years of Armenian genocide, there was a certain fear among the ruling elite that were developing towards the centennial, towards the anniversary of Armenian genocide, that as if something would happen. With the recognition in international arena, as you know, President Bush and then Biden recognized the Armenian genocide. Both Senates of America, the houses, recognized the Armenian genocide. And internationally, it is already an acknowledged topic, and it is not an issue anymore. So Turkey is not under pressure by any international force to acknowledge the Armenian genocide. Turks understood also. So they today think this issue generally solved in that matter. Only problem is now there is a growing understanding in Turkey that there is a strong interconnection between Turkey's democratization and recognition of an historic wrongdoing. And I think the problem in Turkey we have now, this strong interconnection between recognition of historical wrongdoings and democratization of a country. And there are more and more individuals, progressive, people in civil society started understanding this strong connection. And today, the major problem in Turkey, not the genocide recognition, but democratization of Turkey. The lack of rule of law, lack of democratic institutions, and establishment a democratic society is the major problem. And I think especially with the Kurdish problem, people are getting more of the awareness that there is a strong connection with Turkey's democratization and recognition of historic wrongdoings.
Dr. AKCAM, what do you think? Is Turkish denial of the Armenian genocide driven purely by the fears of possible reparations as a logical aftermath of possible recognition? Or does it stem also from the belief that the decision of the founding fathers of Turkish Republic to commit the Armenian genocide was right and justified, and they are maybe proud of it?
You already addressed two important reasons why Turkey denies the Armenian genocide. One is the not be clear about the consequences of it. Because if you acknowledge a historic wrongdoing, you have to rectify it in a way. And majority of Turkish people in Turkey also are not so sure about this topic. So there is a widespread acknowledgement over the years, I would argue, especially after Hrant Dink's assassination. It was a big turning point in Turkey. There is a wide acceptance that something wrong happened in this past. This is the main understanding. But if we acknowledge the Armenian genocide, what would come afterwards? And reparation is a very serious problem here. And this is something that Turkish government fear of. And the second, as you mentioned, what I call the problem of the identification of a nation with its founding fathers. Every nation needs founding fathers. Every nation is proud of their founding fathers. And if we acknowledge Armenian genocide as a fact, we should at the same time also acknowledge that an important number of our founding fathers either were directly involved or became rich throughout genocidal process. But it is not a very difficult issue to overcome these difficulties. Very simple reason. In United States, for example, every university student knows that United States based on slavery, that the founders of United States were slave owners. The White House was built by slaves. But the American youth, the students, are able to put a distance between themselves and the founding fathers. They can be proud of their founding fathers for establishing an independent United States against British colonialists. But at the same time, they are ready also to talk that they were also genocidaires when it comes to Native Americans, and they were slave owners. They combine both of them, and it is possible. Why? Because there is a democratic understanding in the society. This is what we are missing in Turkey. This is the direct connection between democracy and talking about historical injustices. I think this is an important point that Armenian diaspora doesn't grasp enough. This is my experience. In diaspora, and maybe here in Armenia, people do not get this strong connection between democratization of a country and the recognition of historic injustices. Because there is another fact I have to underline. You know, if you are in a democratic country, if you live in democracy, you can still deny the historic injustices. In America, for example, Native American genocide hasn't been acknowledged accurately. It is still there. And so if Turkey could be a democratic country, it would not automatically acknowledge the genocide. But we should never deny it is the entrance ticket. It is the real ticket to the public sphere where you can talk and discuss openly this issue. You know, Turkey had a very limited period of time, especially after 2002, when AKP came to power. We had an opening, a civil society development on the way of membership to European Union. In a very short period of time, we were able, those critical scholars and activists like Hrant Dink and others, we were able to change the attitude in Turkish society. So, denial of Armenian genocide based on two factors. One is the fear of reparation. Second, the identity problem, putting a distance between founding fathers and ourselves. But these can both be overcome if Turkey be a democratic society.
The issue I would like to ask you about has been comprehensively researched at the academic level, and concrete answers have been provided. However, various versions and sometimes speculations still circulate around it. You have been studying Ottoman, Turkish and other available archives and working with official documents that are directly related to the organization of the Armenian genocide. And the question is the following: when and why did the Ottoman Empire decide to commit the Armenian Genocide? When this plan was aroused in the Ottoman Empire, considering particularly the fact that the massacres of Armenians in the Ottoman Empire had already begun during the reign of Abdulhamid?
I can give you two concrete dates based on the evidence that I published in my Turkish book. It hasn't been published in Armenian yet, A Short History of Armenian Genocide. Today, I can definitely argue that based on Ottoman documents, we don't need German, American, British archival materials. Based on Ottoman documents, we can show that the decision to exterminate Armenians was taken 1st December 1914. This is an Ottoman document, is still available in Ottoman archive. According to this document, there has been a decision taken in Erzurum 1st December 1914 by the Teşkilat-ı Mahsusa unit in Erzurum, and Tahsin, governor of Erzurum, who was member of this Teşkilat-ı Mahsusa group in Erzurum, informed the Istanbul government with a telegram saying that please destroy after reading this document, according to which they decided to exterminate the male population of Armenians in Bitlis and Van area. This is Ottoman documents. They use the term extermination of suspicious Armenian 1st December 1914. And the second important document is a letter written by Bahattin Shakir. The date is 4th December, the day I might look, I might maybe not remember exactly. It's around 3rd March 1915. And in that letter, Bahattin Shakir, as member of Teşkilat-ı Mahsusa, officially informs one of the other member of the Union and Progress Party that the Central Committee took a decision to exterminate the entire Armenian population in Anatolia. And according to my estimation, it is a decision taken between February 18, March 3rd. This is the area. So based on these documents and some other available materials, we can easily say that Ottoman government, Union and Progress Party, intentionally exterminate Armenian population. But you may ask when this idea they had, when they started thinking about this topic. Not as a planning stage, not developing this to as an extermination plan, but I think another very crucial turning point was the Armenian Reform Act between Russian and Ottomans, February 14, 1914. February 1914, Russia and Ottoman Empire signed a reform agreement, according to which two semi-autonomous provinces would be established on what generally known Western Armenia, what we called Eastern Turkey, two independent semi-autonomous Armenian provinces. And for Ottoman ruler, for Union and Progress Party, it was very clear that it is the beginning of an independent Armenian state, because Ottomans had an accumulated experience and accumulated knowledge from 19th century. The Greeks, Bulgarians, Romanians, Bosnians, then Lebanon, all European Christians, one after another, became independent based on same pattern. First, certain reforms, then autonomous structure, then independence. When this agreement was signed, 1914 February, Ottomans were convinced Not only Ottomans. If you read the British documents, if you read Russian, German documents, even foreign diplomats were convinced that this was the beginning of an independent Armenian state. And the Ottoman government intended not to implement this plan. And when they entered the First World War, the first thing they did, they annulled this often public agreement with Russia. And it's not a coincidence. Beginning after the signing of February reform agreement, Ottoman government sent a circular to all consulars and embassies, all foreign representatives of Ottoman Empire, considering Armenians as suspicious element and to report from all the world about Armenian activities around the world and their connection with Turkey. And already beginning of August, when they entered the war, they also sent a circular throughout the Ottoman Empire considering Armenians as suspicious element, that their every movement must be traced and controlled. So the fear that something going to happen was already in their mind during the reform agreement.
A claim has been circulating for a long time that the Armenians allegedly were not loyal to the Ottoman Empire, that they were considered as an existential threat, seeking to gain support from the Entente allies during World War I. But there are a lot of facts that Armenians had been doing their best to show their loyalty and escape massacres, escape the Armenian Genocide.
If we want to make a general statement regarding Armenian attitude, or mainly Armenian political parties' attitude towards Ottoman government, I would argue it was too much loyalty, not being a disloyal element. You know, we know from the memoirs of Dashnak party members, even in their last Congress, 1914 August, there were still individuals that believed that there could have been an agreement with Ottoman government, with Union and Progress Party. We know the development in Bitlis and one area, the discussion between young Armenian generation who wanted to resist against Union and Progress Party and the Dashnak leadership. Even that period, they were hoping to find a consensus with Ottoman government. I think if we want to generalize, these are the generalization, I would argue that after especially 1908, despite the Adana massacre of 1919, the Armenian leadership, Dashnak hoped to believe, to be able to develop a consensus between Union and Progress Party and themselves. So they were not in that sense disloyal elements, just the opposite. And as we all know, the first extermination actually of Armenian started in the Ottoman army, and majority of Armenian youth were conscripted in Ottoman army, and they fought in Ottoman army in all fronts during the war years.
Despite this fact, the young Turks decided to commit the Armenian Genocide and exterminate Armenians. Why?
Because they preemptively wanted to prevent establishment of an independent Armenian state. According to this agreement, 1914 February, 2 semi-autonomous provinces be established. For Ottomans, there were no doubt this is the beginning of an independent Armenian state. They thought they are going to lose eastern provinces of empire. And they thought they should take every measure that Armenian claims to a possible independent state were extinct at its very beginning. And when the war started, as everybody knows, on three major fronts, Ottomans started losing the war. Russia won the war in Sarıkamış battle on Caucasus, 1914 December and 1915 January. And then the Dardanelles offensive started, 1915 February, took all the year. And then the third, the Egyptian, the canal, the military operation of Jamal Pasha. On these three fronts, Ottoman started losing the war. And Russian army were advancing. And in the mind of Union and Progress Party was, of course, when the Russian occupied the area, they would establish this autonomous Armenia. So it is better to get rid of them all so that Armenians could never raise this demand. And it is not something that I'm arguing. This is in Talat Pasha's telegrams and writings. When he writes the governor of Aleppo and the immigration bureau that in the charge of settling the Armenians in Syrian desert, he clearly said in his telegram to reduce the Armenian numbers to such a low level that they should never again raise their seditious plan, national interest. They should never develop their national aspirations. So this was their major fear.
Dr. AKCAM, 3 years have passed since the launch of the new Armenia-Turkey normalization process, but there's no progress yet. Why? What does Turkey want from Armenia?
I don't think Turkey wants anything from Armenia. I think Turkey is not an independent agency in that process. Unfortunately, I wish my country, which is a very powerful country with almost 90 million, one of the strongest power, it belongs to G20 actually, such a powerful country in the Middle East should develop their own independent foreign policy. I think when it comes to Armenia, it's very, very really deep saddened issue for me that Turkey looks towards Azerbaijan. Turkey has been doing only what Azerbaijan tells him to do. This is so misfortunate, this is so unfortunate, and unfortunately Turkey won't normalize the relation with Armenia unless Azerbaijan give the green light.
What do you think? Is Turkey ready to see an Armenian statehood next to it? Or does it have a desire to eliminate it? I don't mean particularly the option of possible military occupation of Armenia. I mean to eliminate Armenia as a regional factor.
I can answer this question yes and no. I'm a historian. I know the historic records. There are so many telegrams of Talat, Enver, especially in 1918. And there has been serious debates in Turkish parliament on the existence of Armenian state. If we look into these documents, we see a double standard, a dual approach of Turkish rulers. On the one side, they say they would prefer actually if there hasn't been an Armenian state there. It's better for them. This is what Talat, this is what Talat writes in their telegram or Enver. It would have been better for us if there hadn't been such an state there. But on the other side, they are realistic and they said it's not so important, and we cannot eliminate this problem, and we don't need to eliminate. So their approach was 1918. We should keep them as weak as possible. And why they were in favor of an Armenian state in 1918? Because of Russia. You know, regardless the regime characters, whether Russia is Bolshevik or Tsarist regime or Putin, or whether in Turkey there is a Kemalist regime or Islamist regime, there is a geopolitical reality. And geopolitical reality is the following. It is Turkey's interest to have the buffer states between Russia and Turkey. It is in interest of Turkey to have Armenia and Georgia as neighboring states as Russia. Russia is powerful, stronger, and for Turkey it is better to have these power states in between, and this is the Turkey's interest, and this is the policy that it should be that Turkey should develop actually. And I think today Turkey kind of ready to develop normalization, the relation, because again, Armenia is a very small state. It is not much a big danger to Turkey. The Turkish ruling elite knows that. You know, the population of Armenia is not the half of the population in Kadıköy, one neighborhood in Istanbul. So in that sense, it is advantageous actually for Turkey's geopolitical interest to have Georgia, Armenia, and Azerbaijan as a kind of independent states on Caucasus than to have Russia on their border.
Isn't it important for Turkey to have a direct ground connection with Azerbaijan and then with Central Asia to create the Turkish world?
I don't think we can explain the entire political developments with the desires. If you let the Turkish desires or the ruling elite, they would love to recreate the Ottoman Empire, they would love to have...
We see that ambitions in the Middle East.
I don't think... There is a misperception here in Armenia and everywhere also. You mostly consider Turkish rulers as fanatic aggressors that want to recreate old Ottoman dreams. They are not so fanatic actually, and they are actually very realistic animals. I think Turkish rulers today, the Turkish state, knows very well their boundaries, how powerful they are.
What are the boundaries? What do you think?
They can be a powerful state in the Middle East, but they know nobody would allow them to recreate their old empire boundaries. There is, if you want to, let me put more geostrategical terms, okay? There is a belief here in Armenia or in Europe, I know in United States, that Turks believes in Pax Ottomanica. This is like the Pax Roma. This means to create something like Roman Empire. Davutoğlu wrote a book about it, and Pax Ottomanica, zero problem with neighbor, expansionism, and
the
so on.
Strategic depth.
If you want to understand Turkey's policy today, I would argue they develop Pax Türkiye. There is a new model. This model includes a strong Turkey controls Turkey's sphere of influences, mainly in Syria and in North Iraq, and developing Turkey as a power within the Middle East, not without much expansion of its boundaries. I know that it is not a realistic aim for them, they know that. And if you follow the recent political development in Turkey, you will understand that Turkey is working towards a new domination in the Middle East that goes towards an alliance with Israel, and this alliance would control the Middle East. This is the place that Turkey is seeking for itself. In the early period of AKP regime, Tayyip Erdogan indeed wanted to extend the sphere of influence of Turkey based on Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt and in Syria. In both areas, they failed. The coup d'etat in Egypt that was organized 2012 or 2013, I forgot the year now, against Muslim Brotherhood. It was also a coup d'etat against the Turkey's domination attempts in the Middle East. So Turkey knows that they can be powerful in the Middle East only if they can make an agreement, if they can find a common ground with Israel and Saudi Arabia. This is the direction that Turkey is developing now.
Do you consider that the Kurdish issue is being closed within Turkey, taking into account the recent call of Abdullah Öcalan from the jail addressed to PKK to disarm, as well as the new status quo in Syria?
Just starting, just the opposite. It's a new beginning, and we don't know where it's going to end. This is the topic of my book also. The major issue with Kurds is the problem of equality in Turkey. Kurds are not equal citizens in Turkey, period. Why I'm arguing it? Because it is the Constitution. Article 66 considers every citizen as a Turk. If you claim yourself as Kurd, Armenian, you are not equal citizen. You cannot get higher authorities in administration, legal system, and so on and so forth. And with the Abdullah Öcalan's call, Turkey entered a new process. This is with the strategic connection that we discussed before. And I'm hoping that this call and this process give positive results. You can, in that sense, compare Turkey's attempt to solve the Kurdish problem with South Africa. De Klerk, the racist South African president who launched the process of dismantling apartheid regime in Turkey, is now in Turkey Devlet Bahçeli, the right-wing extreme nationalist who also launched this process. And his model is to establish a new nation state, a new state where Kurds and Turks are equal. They already declared in their statements that the Kurds and Turks are not equal, that the citizens are not equal. This is now well accepted reality in Turkey. To my surprise, I mean, this is the topic that I published my last book, and they acknowledge that they are not equal, Turks and Kurds. Now they claim that they are aiming to establish a new nation state where Turks and Kurds are going to be the equal citizens. So the Abdullah Öcalan's call and the government's readiness and the PKK's dissolving themselves as a political party is the beginning of into this new arena. And I want to be optimist in that regard.
Why is the creation of the so-called Zangezur corridor is important for Turkey? Because we always hear statements about the importance of the so-called corridor from Ankara.
The main reason, I mean, there is an easy answer to that. Turkey wants to have a direct access to Azerbaijan and direct access to Central Asian states. But my belief is this theory of pan-Turkic nations to reach out Central the Turkish Republic in Central Asia. These are not very important strategic goals. These are only some ideological issues that they use in public, maybe. Turkey knows that they cannot be influential over Central Asiatic states, and their dreams when the Soviet Union dismantled 1990, that they could develop a unification with Central Asiatic Turkic Republic. These were old dreams that crashed. I think this Zangezur corridor debate, Armenians' way of putting the things is acceptable for Turkey. They will accept because they want to free access, and they can have it like the Suez Canal in Egypt, and this is the Armenian position, this is the Armenian sovereign territory, and on that territory, of course, there can be a free access. And I think it will be realized itself. I don't think Turkey has a very much independent policy towards that direction. Coming back again, it is Azerbaijan. I think the major issue is the Azerbaijan's unending demands from Armenia. This is the main concern, and Turkey doesn't care much. It is not on the top agenda of Turkey. This is what I see, at least, in Turkish development. So Turkey cannot be a world power. Turkey will be and want to be a regional power, and they have enough supports for this. Americans, Great Britons, and Russians. Turkey really coordinates within these great powers successfully. I give you a concrete example to understand Turkey's role. Turkey in Ukraine war officially break the American embargo, and America accepted this. Turkey officially delivered weapons to Ukraine. Russia accepted this. Two great powers who were in conflict and fight with each other, they accepted Turkey's position, which is contrary to their own position. This shows the regional power of Turkey, and this also shows that they need actually Turkey, and Turkey is playing with these great powers accordingly. So Turkey is not a simple partner that do everything whatever told to Turkey. It is an independent regional power. This is the important part to understand.
Dr. AKCAM, thank you very much for this interesting conversation.
I thank you so much for having me here.
My guest was TANER AKCAM. Keep up with the factor of power and take care.